Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Fort Worth Pride Month program. I am Kenneth Nally with the Park and Recreation Department and a Diversity and Inclusion Employee Committee volunteer. The D&I Employee Committee leads the volunteer work groups working under the leadership of the Diversity and Inclusion Department that planned today's program. I'm thrilled to introduce our presentation today, Celebrating Diversity in STEM, the crucial role of LGBTQ+, which was researched and created by City of Fort Worth employees. The presentation will be followed by a performance from Spectrum Ensemble, a nonprofit organization with a mission of creating great music and highlighting talented LGBTQ+ musicians while contributing to queer representation in the classical music world. Before we begin our program, though, we have a few remarks from Assistant City Manager Fernando Costa.
Thank you, Kenneth, and good afternoon, folks. It's wonderful to see so many city employees here. On behalf of City Manager David Cook, I'm happy to extend a word of welcome to you during this Pride Month celebration. And I'd like to recognize one of our guests who's here, who's a leader of our LGBT community in Fort Worth and a former chair of our Human Relations Commission, Felipe Gutierrez. Felipe, welcome. If you haven't had a chance to get acquainted with Felipe, I encourage you to do so. He's a great resource in our community. And as I think all of you know, our city manager's office migrated recently over to the new City Hall, 100 Fort Worth Trail. But I'm glad that we're meeting here in the old council chamber today, because for me, it brings back a lot of memories. This council chamber over the last 50 plus years has been the site of many important events, and just during my tenure with the city, which goes back to the last century, I've witnessed three council meetings which were characterized by tumultuous protests over grievances. And I wanted to mention them to you. One was a protest over the relocation of public housing residents from the former Ripley Arnold Place into the Stonegate neighborhood. Does anybody remember that incident? A few, well, of course, Grace, a few old folks in the audience will remember, but that was tumultuous. It was people protesting folks with lower incomes moving into their neighborhood. Well, these were just ordinary human beings who wanted a safe place to live. And in fact, the experience of the past 20 or so years has demonstrated that these folks are just as law-abiding as anybody. And it led to reform in support of mixed income housing across Fort Worth. A second incident occurred after the arrest of Jacqueline Craig. And it led not just to one protest, but multiple protests. And it led to the creation of the Task Force on Race and Culture and a host of initiatives to promote racial justice in Fort Worth. And the third incident, which I think is particularly appropriate for us to reflect upon today, was a protest in the immediate aftermath of the Rainbow Lounge incident, almost exactly 15 years ago. I remember sitting right over here, and the meeting went on, and folks were justifiably upset about what had happened at the Rainbow Lounge. You can see pictured on the screen, I don't know if anybody recognizes the speaker, but his name is John Nelson. John Nelson was a prominent attorney in Fort Worth who was instrumental in creating a group called iCare, which led to the relocation of the I-30 freeway to the south side of the post office building and other historic buildings. He was very prominent in Fort Worth, but he also founded a group called Fairness Fort Worth, which was aimed at representing the rights of the LGBT community in Fort Worth. And we were able to work with Mr. Nelson and other LGBT leaders to create a task force that began looking into the legitimate grievances of LGBT residents in Fort Worth. And next slide, please. That task force recommended a set of 20 recommendations. 20 recommendations were issued by the task force in response to legitimate concerns raised by LGBT residents in Fort Worth. And I'm glad to say that 19 of the 20 recommendations were accepted and implemented by the city. The only one that was not had to do with gender reassignment surgery being included in our health insurance plan. But all the other recommendations were adopted. And 15 years ago, I will say, that was not an easy lift. That was a lot of hard work and a lot of cultural change within the organization of city government. But it happened because employees and community leaders became engaged and turned their justifiable grievances into constructive action. We have a lot to learn from that experience. And it led, next slide, please. It led to Fort Worth instituting so many reforms that when we began to measure our welcoming attitude toward LGBT residents by means of the Municipal Equality Index, this is a national measure of how well citizens across the country, cities across the country treat their LGBT residents. Next slide, please. We scored a perfect 100 in Fort Worth. Now, I will tell you, 15 years ago, we couldn't have come close to saying that. Today, we can. We can take pride as a community and as city government in saying that we're intending, we're not perfect, of course, but we're intending to treat all of our residents, regardless of age, race, gender, orientation, equally, in fact, equitably in proportion to their needs. And that applies to LGBT residents as well, which is why I think we can take pride in Pride Month in Fort Worth, Texas. So thank you for being here. I think we've got a great program in front of us, and I look forward to enjoying it with you. Okay, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando, for those remarks. Now I want to welcome my City of Fort Worth colleagues who will be giving our presentation today. William Cheek, Jared Dempsey, Marissa Rodriguez, and Martin McElroy. Take it away, y'all.
Thank you, Kenneth, for that introduction. First things first, happy Pride, y'all. Woo! All right, well, my name is William Cheek. I am with the Parks and Recreation Department, and I am here along with my fellow City of Fort Worth employees, Jared Dempsey with the library, Martin McElroy with the Development Services, and Marissa Rodriguez with Code Compliance to be presenting Celebrating Diversity in STEM, the crucial role of LGBTQ+ representation. The representation of the LGBTQ+ community is indispensable in science, technology, and engineering, and how it contributes to a more dynamic, inclusive, and innovative future. At the core of a thriving STEM and STEAM community lies inclusivity. When LGBTQ+ individuals witness themselves represented in these disciplines, a powerful message resonates. They belong, and their contributions are valued. The sense of belonging is vital for instilling confidence and motivation in individuals to pursue their STEAM passions without the apprehension of discrimination. Diversity is the catalyst for innovation. LGBTQ+ individuals often approach challenges with unique viewpoints, leading to creative solutions not readily conceived in less diverse environments. The intersectionality of identities within the LGBTQ+ community enriches the thought landscape in STEAM workplaces. The representation of LGBTQ+ community in STEAM provides dreamers with the opportunity within the community with role models. Visibility holds significance. Witnessing accomplished professionals who share their sexual orientation and gender identity inspires the next generation to pursue their careers in these fields. For this reason, the Pride Month Program Planning Committee of the Diversity and Inclusion Employee Committee has chosen to highlight 13 individuals who have made significant contributions in the fields of science, technology, and engineering. First up, Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld. Magnus Hirschfeld was a Jewish-German doctor and a sexologist expert in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Although he never publicly declared his sexuality, his relationships with his partner Karl Gies and later Li Xietong were an open secret. Hirschfeld was a trailblazer in many ways. He started the Scientific Humanitarian Committee in 1896, which lobbied for the repeal of the German penal code that criminalized homosexuality. He published papers and books arguing that queerness was an innate and natural part of human diversity, not an illness or aberration. He even co-wrote and acted in a film, Different from the Others, that had one of the first LGBTQ+ characters ever written for film. Perhaps his most important accomplishment was founding and running the Institute for Sexual Research, which was a beacon of scientific research, sexual education, gender-affirming medical treatment, and LGBTQ+ community throughout Europe and beyond. Hirschfeld brought together doctors who had pioneered the first gender-affirming medical interventions, including surgery and hormone therapy. Trans people came from all over to access these life-saving treatments and be able to live their lives as their authentic selves. As an outspoken, liberal, gay, Jewish man, Hirschfeld and his work were frequently targeted. Just months after Hitler became chancellor, and 14 years after the Institute had opened, the Nazis' paramilitary wing sacked the Institute. 4 days later, every volume from the immense library was publicly burned in what becomes the most well-known Nazi book burning, although few now know that it was the Institute's library that was being burned. Hirschfeld, who was abroad at the time of the sacking, would die 2 years later in 1935 while in exile in France. His motto, "Through science to justice," which reflected Hirschfeld's idea that a better scientific understanding of homosexuality would end homophobia, was engraved on his tombstone. Dr. Sarah Josephine Baker. Dr. Sarah Josephine Baker was credited with expanding the scope of public health care in the United States and was born in 1873 in Poughkeepsie, New York, to Daniel Mosher Baker, a lawyer, and Jenny Harwood Brown, one of the first graduates of Vassar College. When Baker's father died suddenly when she was 16, she gave up a Vassar scholarship to go to medical school to train for a secure career as a physician. Despite opposition from family members who were skeptical of women physicians, Baker persuaded her mother that she was making the right decision. While studying at the Women's Medical College of New York Infirmary from 1894 to 1898, she took full advantage of the opportunity to work within a network of very successful female physicians, including Mary Putnam Jacoby, negotiating a post-graduation internship at the New England Hospital for Women and Children in Boston, where she came to understand the connection between poverty and poor health that would occupy her for the rest of her career. In 1899, Dr. Baker opened a private practice in New York, and 8 years later became the city's assistant commissioner of health, working on a number of high-profile health issues, including smallpox vaccinations and public health programs to improve the standards of hygiene, midwife training, infant care, school health, and health education in the city's immigrant communities. Dr. Baker shines not only for her contributions to public health and social policy, but also for her work as a woman in government administration, supervising a staff which included many male physicians skeptical of women in medicine. She devised wardrobe strategies to minimize her femininity. She wore man-tailored suits and shirts, stiff collars and ties. She often joked that colleagues didn't think of her as a woman, and they often disparaged women physicians in conversation with her. Her work made her the leading figure in public health, and the New York City Bureau of Child Hygiene became the model for similar programs in other cities, as well as the United States Children's Bureau, which was established in 1912. Martin?
Good morning, everyone. It's not sleepy. Give me a second here. So, Dr. Sally Ride. Sally Ride was born on May 26, 1951, in Los Angeles, California. She grew up playing sports and competing in national junior tennis tournaments, but it was her fascination with science that led her to become a physicist, a science writer, and an inspirational advocate for science literacy. In 1977, while finishing her PhD in physics at Stanford University, she saw an ad in the student newspaper that NASA was looking for astronauts for the first time, was allowing women to apply. She was one of only 35 people, including 6 women, chosen to join the astronaut corps from among 8,000 applicants. When Challenger mission STS-7, blasted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on June 18, 1983, Sally Ride soared into history as the first American woman in space. Her second flight, STS-41G, also aboard Challenger, launched on October 5, 1984. Ride was the only person to serve on the presidential commissions investigating both the Challenger explosion in 1986 and the Columbia disaster in 2003. She retired from NASA in 1987. In 2001, founded her own company, Sally Ride Science, to pursue her longtime passion for motivating girls and boys to study science and explore careers in science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. Sally Ride died on July 23, 2012, after a 17-month battle with pancreatic cancer. In 2013, she was posthumously, sorry if I said that word wrong, awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, our nation's highest civilian honor, by President Barack Obama, a fitting tribute to a remarkable life that became a symbol of the ability of women to break barriers. For the ladies. Okay. George Washington Carver. Though he was born into slavery, George Washington Carver struggled and persisted in his quest for an education in the early years of the post-Civil War South. After, after obtaining his master's degree, Carver was invited to lead the agriculture department at the Tuskegee Institute in 1896 and remained there for 47 years. Because decades of aggressive cotton farming had depleted the soil of vital nutrients, Carver's research focused on finding crop alternatives to cotton, such as peanuts, sweet potatoes, which he wanted poor farmers to grow as a source of food, and other products to improve their quality of life. While analyzing which nutrients various crops took from the soil and left behind, Carver developed a theory that would become his greatest contribution to agricultural science: crop rotation. This revolutionary practice, now quite commonplace, became the most efficient way to restore the chemical balance of the soil. It has also introduced newly marketable foodstuffs and derivative products that could be made and sold to boost the economic fortunes of former slaves still trapped in poverty. Carver's scientific achievements challenged racial stereotypes, eventually making him the most famous African American of all time. Business leaders like Henry Ford came to seek his advice, as well as American presidents Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, and Franklin Roosevelt. Though his renown helped to raise the profile of Tuskegee, along with the desperately needed funds, administrators worried about potential scandal from the persistent rumors that he was gay, especially after 1935 when Carver became life partners with fellow researcher Austin W. Curtis Jr., a relationship which endured until Carver's death in 1943, at which President Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized $30,000 for the George Washington Carver National Monument, the first to be dedicated to an African American and also the first to a non-president. Though numerous awards and accolades have been bestowed upon Carver, his most enduring tribute comes from America's public school system through all the elementary and high schools which still bear his name. Allen L. Hart. Allen L. Hart was assigned female at birth, though his parents' support and understanding enabled him to dress and live as a boy. He was forced to comport himself as female while pursuing both his undergraduate and his medical doctorate from the University of Oregon using the name Robert Allen Bamford Jr. In 1918, he married Inez Stark, and to curb any risk of pregnancy and to avoid complications of menstruation, he underwent a hysterectomy. Knowing his medical degree was not in his chosen name, Bamford started his medical residency under the name Dr. Allen L. Hart. Despite these early efforts at transition, a classmate from medical school recognized and repeatedly outed him. This led to a recurring pattern of relocations and job changes for Hart and his wife. Stress from such continuous secrecy and disruption led to their divorce. In 1925, Hart remarried Miss Helen Rudick. By then, his focus began to shift to medical research. He received his first master's degree in radiology in 1930 and a second in public health in 1948. In the late 1940s, Hart also began taking newly available synthetic male hormones. These treatments enabled him to grow a beard and lowered his voice enough so he could finally begin lecturing on his study of tuberculosis, one of the most virulent diseases in U.S. history. With no routine blood tests available to confirm a diagnosis, Hart spearheaded a massive nationwide campaign to use X-ray technology to screen people's lungs for evidence of infection in the early stages of the disease. The highly successful detection of, this highly successful detection effort led to earlier diagnosis and the temporary isolation of carriers in sanatoriums, where they could recover before infecting others. Hart's visionary pioneering efforts to contain the spread of tuberculosis took place 20 years before the epidemiological test we have now was developed, saving millions of lives. Yet he lived almost his entire life with most people completely unaware he was transgender, including those who have studied his medical research, despite his unparalleled impact on our understanding of infectious disease. Dr. Allen L. Hart passed away in quiet obscurity from heart disease in 1962. Sophie Wilson. Sophie Wilson was born in Leeds, England in 1957. She began studying computer science at the University of Cambridge in 1975. In 1977, she developed an automated cow feeder during her first summer vacation. She next designed an Acorn System 1, an early 8-bit microcomputer for her hobbies, which was produced commercially by the British company Acorn Computers beginning in 1979. Now working at Acorn, she and colleague Steve Ferber took less than a week to design and implement the prototype of what became the BBC microcomputer. Ferber and Wilson refined their design over the same summer, with Wilson designing the operating system and writing the BBC Basic Interpreter. The BBC project succeeded beyond its creators' wildest dreams. In the ensuing decade, well over 1 million BBC micros were sold and used in thousands of UK schools. Wilson and Ferber then co-designed the 32-bit RISC machine processor in 1985. This was used in the BBC Micro as a second processor in 1986. Acorn's first general purpose home computer based on their own ARM architecture, the Archimedes in 1987, and Apple Computer's first personal digital assistant, the Newton, in 1993. The ARM processor core is now used in thousands of different products, from mobile phones and tablets to digital televisions and video games. The number of ARM processor cores now shipped exceeds 30 billion, or more than 4 ARM microprocessors for every person on Earth. Wilson lives near Cambridge, England. Marissa?
Good afternoon. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. We're going to talk today about John Maynard Keynes. He entered King's College, Cambridge in 1902 and soon gave up studying mathematics to pursue a career in economics and politics. While there, he was also drawn to the Apostles, an elite group of free spirits, artists and writers, mostly gay and bisexual, that produced several influential relationships for him, which endured for decades. Keynes taught economics at Cambridge until he was called into service by the Treasury Office to accompany Lloyd George to the Versailles Peace Conference, where he was appalled by what he saw as draconian measures of reparations that were to be imposed on Germany in the aftermath of World War I. He resigned his position in protest and wrote The Economic Consequences of the Peace, 1919, perhaps the most influential polemic on Western politics of the era. His permanent influence on 20th century economics, though was assured with the publication The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money from 1935 to 1936, a monumental work that asserted the Great Depression could not be blamed on the unemployed, but on the activities of business investors and the government. He endorsed private investment, easy credit, and low interest rates, and recommended that governments run deficits in a slow economy, all policies which influenced most Western democracies in the second half of the 20th century. During World War II, he assumed the most significant role in the history of international economics by overseeing the creation of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which remain the preeminent financial institutions of the world today. During the Second World War, Alan Turing worked at Britain's code-breaking center, where he was responsible for German naval cryptanalysis. Using the computational Turing machine methodology, I can't say that word either, he invented in 1936. Turing is credited with breaking the Nazi Enigma code, which had been used to coordinate the U-boat Juggernaut that sank hundreds of ships in the North Atlantic, ferrying vital supplies to the European theater of the war. While supply lines finally opened, the stage was set for the successful D-Day landing at Normandy, turning the war to the Allies' favor, leading to the defeat of Adolf Hitler. In 1947, Turing began to muse publicly about the concept of machine intelligence, and in 1950 published Computing Machinery and Intelligence, where he first set out to devise what would become known as the Turing test for artificial intelligence. Brilliantly realized and elegantly simple, the Turing test remains a benchmark in the quest to determine when a computer becomes self-aware. In 1999, Time magazine named Turing one of the 100 most influential scientists of the 20th century, stating that everyone who taps at a keyboard, opens a spreadsheet or a word processing program is working on an incarnation of the Turing machine. Turing lived in an era when homosexuality was still both illegal and officially considered a mental illness. In 1952, after being arrested for admitting to a sexual liaison with another man, he was convicted and sentenced to chemical castration. 2 weeks before his 42nd birthday, he bit into an apple laced with cyanide and ended his life. The tragedy of Turing's suicide is trumped only by the loss of humanity that his death dealt to the field of computer science. Given all that he accomplished, it is impossible to overstate the potential magnitude of his unrealized contributions. Acknowledging Turing's legacy on September 10th of 2009, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued an official apology for the government's treatment of Alan Turing after the World War. He was officially pardoned by Queen Elizabeth in December of 2013. Turing's pardon prompted a nationwide movement to reverse the convictions of everyone whose lives was shattered by Britain's gross indecency law. In 2016, the Alan Turing Law was passed by the British Parliament, exonerating all those imprisoned under the antiquated statute. Considered a national hero today, Alan Turing's likeness now graces England's £50 note. Miss Gemma Redmond was both an innovator and biotech engineer who focused her work on the bioprinting process. As a child, she loved to take things apart and put them back together again, trying to improve on the design as she did so. Born in 1978 in Towley, Dublin suburb, Redmond studied electronic engineering before earning her undergraduate degree in applied science at Robert Gordon University. She then went to complete a master's degree in nanobioscience from University College Dublin in 2012. She began making her first bioprinters at her kitchen table. Her master's thesis focused on 3D printing finger bones from mouse-derived bone cells. Redmond was intersex and infertile. As part of her interest in biological 3D printing stemmed from a desire to print herself working reproductive organs. She co-founded a 3D printing startup called R Robotics in 2015. Her work caught the eye of several venture capital firms, as well as a startup incubator in Cork, Ireland. Redmond served as R Robotics CEO, and under her leadership, the company developed the first 3D printer capable of using 10 different biomaterials at once. She was also a firm advocate for affordable and open science, and our robotics' second 3D printer was entirely open source and an order of magnitude cheaper than the first design. Her hope was that one day every hospital and university in the world would have a bioprinter on site that could print new organs for donors for patients on the transplant list. She also envisioned melding the biological and the technological, such as by implanting sensors in organs to monitor health. Redmond unexpectedly died in 2016 at the age of 38. Margaret Chung, born in Santa Barbara, California, Dr. Chung was the first American-born Chinese woman to become a physician. After completing her internship and residency in Chicago and Kankakee, Illinois, she established one of the first Western medical clinics in San Francisco's Chinatown in the 1920s. Chung achieved fame during the 1930s and 40s for her patriotic activities on behalf of China and the United States. Known as Mom Chung, she adopted over 1,000 U.S. troops who pledged their fealty for her commitment to their well-being. Renowned for her hospitality and generosity, she sent care packages to the troops and hosted weekly Sunday suppers in her modestly sized home in San Francisco, where regular soldiers mingled with the likes of John Wayne, Ronald Reagan, Tennessee Williams, Helen Hayes, and Tallulah Bankhead, along with many other politicians and the military's top brass. All bound to each other through mutual affection for Chung and their common dedication to the Allied cause. Chung used her considerable wartime celebrity to lobby for the creation of the Waves, the U.S. Women's Naval Reserve, but was never given public credit. The achievement she was never given credit for any of her achievements, nor was she permitted to join the Waves due to her age, race, and suspected lesbianism. Described as a serious, commanding, almost regal person, Chung nevertheless had a bally sense of humor. Reinventing herself at will, she routinely flouted convention by adopting both hypermasculine and Hollywood glamour personas, while also managing to guard her privacy, and in spite of her intimate relationship with lesbianist poetess Elsa Gildro, and entertainer Selfie Tucker. A larger-than-life personality to the end, when Margaret Chung died in 1959, her pallbearers included Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, famed conductor Andre Costelantz, and San Francisco Mayor George Christopher. Few civilian patriots had ever achieved any level of celebrity and influence, according to Dr. Margaret Chung. You guys, please welcome Jared.
Last stretch. Lynn Conway. Lynn Conway quietly revolutionized microchip design and blazed a trail boldly for others to follow. She has been called the hidden hand of the 1970s chip design movement that made today's consumer electronics and personal computing devices possible. Conway was born in Mount Vernon, New York, and studied physics at MIT and earned a bachelor's degree and master's in electrical engineering from Columbia University in 1962 and 63. She had no experience with microchips before she developed a simpler, scalable method for designing them with Caltech professor Carver Mead at the renowned Xerox Palo Alto Research Center in the mid-1970s. Their textbooks and the courses it spawned standardized and democratized a process that was once the sole purview of specialists at large, private semiconductor firms. Thousands of students were soon trained during what came to be known as the Mead-Conway Revolution in very large-scale integration. VLSI refers to the process of arranging increasingly smaller and more plentiful transistors on an integrated circuit. In addition to her roles at IBM and Xerox, Conway, whose guiding principle was, "Why not question everything?" also served as Associate Dean for Instruction and Instructional Technology at the University of Michigan from 1985 until her retirement in 1998. She also held positions as a visiting professor at MIT, chief scientist at the National Science Foundation, and assistant director for strategic computing at the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and held 5 US patents. As a young adult, Conway was one of the first Americans to undergo modern gender transition. And in her retirement, she became an outspoken advocate for transgender rights and women in STEM fields. During most of her noteworthy career, Conway kept a low profile. It felt necessary for safety and security, especially after she was fired from IBM for being open about her transition in 1968. The company later issued an apology in 2020, but as a result, many of her contributions were overlooked for a long time. In 2000, she noticed others being credited for aspects of her work. And so she decided to begin telling her story, developing a robust catalog of online resources and advice about gender identity and transitioning. More recently, she named her experience of being sidelined in history the Conway effect, and chronicled instances of others who were, quote, supposed to innovate, unquote. Wendy Carlos, a visionary pioneer of electronic music, helped to develop the Moog synthesizer and was instrumental in bringing electronically created music into the mainstream. Born in 1939 in Rhode Island, Carlos began taking piano lessons at the age of 6. At the age of 6, and by 10, she was composing her own music. An interest in engineering and electronics accompanied Carlos's early passion for music, and using some wood and soldering wire, she constructed a hi-fi system for her family. And in 1953, aged 14, Carlos won a science competition with a computer she had built from scratch. Wendy Carlos went on to study music and physics at Brown University, graduating from Columbia in 1965 with a master's degree in composition. While studying for her master's, Carlos met Robert Moog, who would soon become the founder and innovator of the first ever commercial synthesizer, aptly named the Moog synthesizer. Carlos herself was a key to the final version of the Moog synthesizer that made it onto the shelves, suggesting that the inventor add features such as a filter bank and control to allow the pitch to slide up and down. Carlos used her own Moog to create catchy jingles and other sound effects for televised advertisements, and compose her own music, including her debut album, Switched on Bach, a groundbreaking, entirely electronic album that took more than 1,000 hours to complete. It would reach number 10 on the US Billboard's Chart 200 and remained at the top of the Billboard Classical Album chart for almost 3 years and go on to earn 3 Grammys. Due in no small part to Carlos's work, the Moog went on to become one of the most influential new instruments in popular music, heard on music by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, ABBA, and Donna Summer. She also wrote the soundtrack for Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange and The Shining, and the soundtrack for Disney's Tron in 1982. Wendy Carlos continues to compose music today and enjoys a very private life. Frank Kameny. Institutionalized anti-gay bigotry during the McCarthy era drove astronomer Frank Kameny from his job at the US Army's MAP service and into the pantheon of modern gay LGBT activism. He single-handedly took on the US government using his own name and face to petition the Supreme Court in 1961 to try to overturn his dismissal in an era when gay people were not expected to use their own name or be seen when they were challenging things. He was effectively unemployable in his chosen work after that, and he struggled in poverty, while an aggressive, proactive, and politically driven crusade fueled by his uncompromising belief that gay is good began to take shape in his mind. An apostate of the early homophile movement, Kameny rejected the characterization of homosexuality as a borderline mental illness to win sympathy, if not approval, from straight people, arguing that gay must not be a mere passive battlefield through which conflicting authorities fight their intellectual battles, and that they should play an active role in deciding their own fate. He co-founded an independent chapter of the Mattachine Society in Washington, D.C. to focus on changing laws and challenging institutions whose policies forced people to remain closeted. Along with Barbara Gittings, he led the successful effort to remove homosexuality from the American Psychiatric Association's list of mental disorders in 1973. A veteran of World War II, Kameny deliberately orchestrated Vietnam War hero Sergeant Leonard Matlovich's public admission of homosexuality in order to bring the issue of gay people serving openly in the military into the national consciousness. 35 years later, he was seated in the front row when President Barack Obama signed the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell into law, ending the battle he helped start. Kameny's tactical insights, though heretical in his time, foreshadow political victories which are taken for granted today. In 2009, he received a formal apology from the US government for the original dismissal that catalyzed his resolve to transform the way gay people were treated in society. His numerous accomplishments have made him one of the most influential LGBTQ activists in history. He passed away at the age of 86 on October 11, 2011, what is now National Coming Out Day. This concludes our review of some of the most influential LGBTQ+ figures in STEM, but there are many, many more, and if you would like to learn more on this topic, we have here behind us a few resources for you to check out. And here is a list of the citations that were used to create this presentation here today that we hope you will all enjoy. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys for a fantastic presentation. Another round of applause for them. I'm sure we all learned something we didn't know and perhaps gained a better understanding of how diversity and inclusion has and continues to positively impact each of us. Now it's time to welcome Jamie Esposito and Wai Chi Champion, who will be performing for us today. Jamie, please tell us a little bit about you and the organization you co-founded.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Esposito. Happy Pride, as was already said. So today, we're going to be playing some original music for you. That means this music was written for us. The Ensemble started in 2018, and as was mentioned before, we like spotlighting, highlighting queer composers mostly, and then it's a bonus when we get queer musicians to play with us. But mostly it's creating the space to spotlight a brand of music as queer. So the first piece we're going to play for you today is called Ah Yes, the Three Genders by Alex Temple. Ah Yes, the Three Genders. The meme started as a joking response to things like a trio, such as airport signs labeled men, women, telephone, or an application from whose options are male, female, business. Over time, it was extended to refer any group of three things. In the case, the three genders are metal, wood, and skin. The three materials are paired with vibraphone in these three movements, and the title is also a playful nod to the composer and us as performers' queerness. So metal, we're going to feature handbells, a cymbal, and some like brushes that are also metal. Then we have wood, which is going to feature wood blocks, wood shakers, and then the third movement is skin, and we will make skin sounds, mouth sounds, and then if you have a lot of money, you can have skin drum heads, but we don't, so we're gonna use plastic ones. And I think that's all I need to tell you to understand it. I hope you guys enjoy the first tune. thank you. Okay, just to like tie in some STEM here, because a lot of times, how are we doing on time? Okay, good. We got another piece too. Okay. So just to tie in some STEM, a lot of this with music goes hand in hand with kids in school. So there are a lot of programs that focus on STEM in music with kids. So one example I wanted to take from the music we played with is just how much math is involved in the music that we do. And the idea we're gonna talk about is called polyrhythms. So a polyrhythm, hold on, I wrote it down, is the simultaneous use of two or more rhythms that are not readily perceived as delivered from one another. So what that means is if we take a sound or a rhythm, we can manipulate it so it sounds like two different tempos are being played at the same time. So the first one I'm going to show you is pretty simple. It's called 2/3. And you take the lowest common denominator, which is 6. So you're going to break it down into 6. Our quarter notes gets the outside of the beat. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then to play the 2 over it, you're going to play on the first and fourth of it. So it's, wait. So you can hear this is a rhythm, and then you got, so we could be in a 2, 1, and 2, and 1, or the 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. And you can take that pretty much with every rhythm. The next example I've had was 4/5, and then you take least common denominator, which is 20. So in music, everything kind of just breaks down into fractions. So you would take 16th notes, which is groupings of 4, and spread them out into 20. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and then every 5th note would be the outline to make the sound of a 4/5. So it would sound like, this is the 4 in my left hand, this is the 5 in my right hand. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool? So that's kind of like with kids especially, they learn so much from music. So STEM is very important, I'd say, on all levels. And the more we get kids involved and people involved in music, even the aging generation, the more we can get them drumming and working on all of their abilities. It keeps your mind in check, which is good. Okay, that was the STEM part. So now we have our last piece for you, and y'all, this is my favorite piece. It's called Dorothy Fragments. It was written in 2019. It is a collection of ephemera drawn from drag culture, catchphrases, geosocial apps, and Craigslist discussion forums, among other things. One thing that strikes, this is the composer talking. One thing that strikes me about queer culture is its fragmentary nature. It's highly decentralized, reliant upon coded language and dress, inside jokes, and relentless paraphrasing into subcultures, sub-subcultures, sub-sub-sub-sub-subcultures, and so on. In this piece, the silly, heartbreaking, the nonsensical, and the problematic assemble into an incoherent whole, much like queerness itself. The name Dorothy is in the title, refers to the expression friend of Dorothy. And if you didn't know, that was a coded term back in the day to identify other gay people. They would ask, are you a friend of Dorothy? And it got to the point where police started investigating for someone named Dorothy. So there are 2 types of materials, the rhythm section, the music section, and the interludes, which are speaking parts. A lot of the texts come from Craigslist. And then the pitch material is loosely derived from the melodic fragment of I'm Every Woman, which you'll finally hear at the end, originally by Shaka Khan and rekindled by the dance anthem Whitney Houston. And the text of this fragment appears in the opening sentence of Dee Gilson's poem, Supplication, written in the aftermath of the 2016 Pulse shooting. Strange now to think of you, this song. I'm every woman, it's all about me. Suddenly off key, on repeat, bass and synth bleat against the bathroom walls. Bodies, sticky with vodka, piss, peace, pink disinfectant disc. I hope you guys enjoy. from January 17th, 2019, Los Angeles Craigslist divorce discussion group. I was ignorant at 19 and thought I could de-gay myself by marrying a man and attending church groups. I forced myself for 7 years with a man in vain. Glad I did though, because I have my beautiful children. But anyway, I prefer females. February 22nd, 2017, Los Angeles Craigslist recovery discussion group. I used to drink in gay bars, and one time came to rope tied to a chair at an AA meeting. It was explained to me that I wasn't a cowboy. How I ever made it to AA, I will never know. I wasn't supposed to make it past kindergarten. I had assholes for parents and no help from the community until I got to AA. Then everyone wanted to help me, even those who didn't like me. Los Angeles Craigslist, July 30th, 2016, death and dying. I was diagnosed with HIV 22 years ago, depression in 2010, lymphoma in July of 2016. I came to Los Angeles in 1990 because I'm gay, and I didn't want to live out my life in my home state of Indiana. I didn't expect to get stuck in LA for over half my life now. I'd like to die in the woods, not the city. I'd like to relocate to Oregon or Washington, but don't know how I would unless I know someone who already lives up there. I just got Section 8. I'm hoping to meet someone who lives up there who might be the godsend I'm praying for. I don't want to die in the high desert of LA County. I want to see the redwoods before I die, to jump in the lake or river again, to be around nature. much again for having us play. Thank you, City of Fort Worth, for having us out. And thank you to our sponsors, Black Swan Percussion and Innovative Percussion, for the gear and the help all the time.
Awesome. Wow. Thank y'all so much for that. Thank you for sharing your talent and knowledge with us. That was fantastic. Another round of applause for them. Spectrum Ensemble. Okay, guys, this brings us to the end of our program. But before we conclude, I want to thank all the employees who helped plan today's program and to our audience for making the time today to help us celebrate Pride Month. Thank you, everybody. I also want to acknowledge that this program would not be possible without the support of our city leadership and Diversity and Inclusion Department and its efforts to promote a quality of life in Fort Worth that includes opportunity and access for all. Be sure to read the roundup to learn about opportunities to help plan and attend future programs.